Good evening, you're watching No Spin. I'm Nidhi Razdan. This has to be the craziest story in recent times. Last week, India's Defence Ministry put out a statement that it had, believe it or not, accidentally fired a missile which landed in Pakistan. The ministry said the incident was caused by a technical malfunction in the course of routine maintenance and ordered an inquiry, while regretting also what had happened. Now, make no mistake, this was a very serious incident. India and Pakistan are two hostile nuclear-armed neighbours. While this accident should never have happened, it's also quite remarkable that a disaster was averted and the situation calmly diffused by both sides. It also raises serious questions about the safety systems that we have in place as a responsible nuclear power. The Defence Minister Rajnath Singh will be making a statement on this in Parliament tomorrow. My colleague Vishnu Shom has more details on what happened.
This is the BrahMos missile, believed to be the weapon that India accidentally fired into Pakistan on the 9th of March in an incident Delhi has now deeply regretted. The BrahMos is among the most advanced cruise missiles of its class. It flies at 3 times the speed of sound. It's believed to be almost impossible to intercept, which is why the launch of this missile, under whatever circumstances, could have triggered a response from Pakistan, particularly since it now appears that Pakistan actually tracked the flight of the missile. This is the flight path Pakistan claims the missile flew. They say it launched somewhere near Sirsa before it fell in Mia Channu after flying more than 100 kilometers inside Pakistani airspace. Now, the Defence Ministry in a statement has said that in the course of routine maintenance, a technical malfunction led to the accidental firing of a missile. The Government of India has taken a serious view and has ordered a high-level court of inquiry. But there are key questions that remain unanswered. Did a state-of-the-art missile system not have multiple safeties to prevent an accidental launch? Who authorized the removal of these safeties? Were target coordinates already entered in the missile, since it appears to have changed flight mid-course? Did the BrahMos not have a self-destruct mode in case of a mistaken launch? Now, the BrahMos, which is being exported to the Philippines, is also in use with the Indian Army, Air Force and Navy. The accidental launch of this missile in an environment where both India and Pakistan are almost always on hair-trigger alert had the potential of being catastrophic if there was an immediate retaliation, for example, from Islamabad. Vishnu Shom for NDTV.
Well, quite a story that. General Satish Dua joining us on the program tonight, the former chief of the Integrated Defence Staff. Also with us, Suhasini Haider, the national editor of The Hindu, will be joined by more panelists in just a couple of minutes. But General Dua, to you first, what did you think when you first heard that this had happened? I mean, it's quite something, isn't it, sir?
To be very frank, I almost didn't believe it when I thought this is some hoax. So, I mean, I never thought we would get into a situation like this. But having sort of heard this through thereafter, it is an accident. Why and how it has happened, we'll have to wait for the inquiry to come out with a conclusive report, and I'm sure that will be very soon. But it does throw up our inadequacies. It also throws up issues from the other side in Pakistan, and something that both sides are not going to be happy about. But all I would like to end my opening comments with is to say that thank God they did not retaliate for whatever reasons. We'll go into details later. But this could have been start of something very nasty.
Absolutely, and that's why this is actually such an important story. Suhasini Haider, we know now that India has over decades built this reputation for being a responsible nuclear power, and it stands out in the world for being that, which is why it also got an exemption from the nuclear suppliers group so many years ago. How does this incident sort of raise a question mark on that, or is it too early to say there is even a question mark at all? Will that really depend on what our inquiry shows?
Well, I think there is a danger, Nidhi, that it isn't just the missile misfire that could affect India's credibility. And as you pointed out, India got a waiver at the NSG. We are members of the MTCR, the Missile Technology Control Regime, the Australian Group, the Wassenaar Arrangement, and many more such multilateral organizations that really look very closely at the nuclear record and safety record of every country that becomes a member. I think there's a greater danger in the way the government has managed its public explanation over this. First, the explanation coming 48 hours after the missile malfunction seems extremely tardy, and I think it is necessary for the government to explain why they weren't the first to put out this statement, rather than have all of us in India listen to the Pakistani DGIS PR speaking and to the Pakistani Foreign Ministry speaking. I think there's also a danger in the language that we have seen in that statement, and we can come to that later. But it certainly shows this as if it is something to move on from. A high-level inquiry has now been formed, but very basic questions, and I'm not an expert here on missile technology, but very basic questions. When a statement says it is learned that the missile landed in Pakistan, I would like to know whether we were tracking the missile from the moment we knew it had, through a technical malfunction, misfired. And I think it is necessary to know, and perhaps the defense minister will shed some light on it, what were the steps taken to de-escalate any possible tensions. I can only imagine that there was some kind of a back channel at work that meant that Pakistan did not actually issue any statements for 24 hours. I can only assume that the lack of any kind of escalation is because there were some determined efforts by both sides to prevent any escalation.
Entirely possible. We have Dr. Tara Kartha, Distinguished Fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, also joining us. And Munize Jahangir, a well-known journalist, has been a colleague of us here at NDTV, also joining us from Lahore. Just to ask you, Dr. Tara Kartha, you wrote a very detailed piece on this matter today. And one of the things you pointed out was that it was interesting that when the DG of the DG ISPR in Pakistan, his first statement actually you found was remarkably restrained, except for one or two statements that, that kind of jingoistic, but you felt that actually they displayed a lot of restraint in their initial response.
Yes, it was actually pretty restrained, because consider that the missile actually, like we said, crossed into Pakistan, crossing at least 3 districts. That's a lot of mileage. So they were surprisingly, like to me, it was a very laid back, not laid back, a very considered response, a very mature response. That much is clear. But that was not quite so in terms of the foreign ministry, of course, who went ballistic pretty much, as well as the NSA, who sort of made all kinds of claims. But then these things are to be expected. But the point is, what I wonder is that Pakistan has a very thick air defense network. It has what they call a comprehensive layered integrated air defense network, and they recently got this Chinese missile, which is the HQ-9, inducted into the system, and that has apparently a stated claim of being able to intercept a missile at a range of 100 kilometers in one shot. So one assumption is that if they did track it, why didn't they fire at it? If they didn't fire at it, I'm assuming that they didn't. I mean, most countries don't have your missile defense systems on all the time. You can't do that. It's much too expensive. But so there are a lot of questions that are raised here. But the fact remains that this was a dangerous thing, and I'm very happy to see that both sides have this time acted with dignity and with a lot of common sense, which you don't really see in most parts of the world.
Absolutely, especially given the current situation in Ukraine. But Munize Jahangir, how is this story playing out in Pakistan? Is the media asking similar questions of the Pakistani government? What Dr. Tara Kartha was talking about in terms of, okay, if you were tracking this missile, why wasn't it shot down? And, what is the sort of general refrain there in the media about this incident?
Well, Nidhi, at the moment, firstly, it's good to see you back on NDTV. And secondly, In Pakistan, right now, Prime Minister Imran Khan is going through a no-confidence motion. A no-confidence motion has been tabled against Prime Minister Imran Khan. And so the focus of the government really is not on foreign policy. It is solidly on what is happening internally. There are several protests that have been planned in the coming few weeks by the opposition parties. And even today, there was a flurry of meetings between the Prime Minister and the allies. He has a very thin majority in the National Assembly, and it is actually cobbled together with various allies from other political parties. And so at the moment, the focus really solely remains on managing to keep the cobbled up coalition together really in the center. As far as criticism is concerned, yes, there was criticism, but it was on the government of Pakistan, on Imran Khan's government, and it was not really on the military of Pakistan. And we all know that in Pakistan, the civil-military divide has always been there, and the military has been very powerful here. So the criticism has really been on Imran Khan's government, mostly from the Pakistan People's Party and the PMLN, led by Nawaz Sharif.
All right, interesting perspective there. General Dua, when you said right in your opening comments that, there are, questions firstly for India and for Pakistan in this on how this entire thing went down. What would the questions be for India, first of all, in your view? And what are the safety measures that are supposed to be in place for a missile like this? How can it just go off?
So those are the very questions that are there for India. Because for a missile to be fired, let alone armed, it wasn't armed, that's known, but for it to be fired, there are multiple mechanical as well as electronic locks. Electronic locks are software driven. So now the locks could be bypassed either because of a technical malfunction or because of human error. In both cases, there is that's a very serious business. If there can be a technical glitch, then which I don't know how the inquiry will bring it out. But if it is a human error and somehow the locks have been bypassed, the protocols have been bypassed, even if it is inadvertently and by mistake, then again it's very serious business. So those are the things that we will have to, Indian side will have to look into. On the other side, I would hazard a guess that they've not been able to detect for about 3 odd minutes that it has violated their airspace before striking the target. Fortunately, there were no casualties. Not the target, sorry, falling where it did. Or it could also be, like Tara just brought out, that maybe it is not expected at this time, and both countries have acted very responsibly. I was reading about it. There was an incident in 1983, at the peak of Cold War, where the Soviets actually detected that missiles had taken, ICBMs had taken off to strike at Russia. Someone actually took a call. An officer, his name also I've read, I forget his name, Russian officer whose name was given, that he actually took a call that there must be something wrong in this report, and actually it did not escalate into an incident, just like it did not escalate into a nasty incident in this case.
It also, I think, Suhasini Haider, underlines the importance of keeping some channels of communication open. At the moment, India-Pakistan ties are at, such a, they're so frosty, and we have reduced diplomatic missions, but we don't know. We possibly do have certain back channels. That's why they're back channels. They're not meant to be publicized. But how important then do those back channels become at a time like this? We can only imagine what happened when, authorities, how they found out, and the sequence of events, who picked up the phone and who called who to diffuse the tension.
So
Absolutely.
Sorry, Suhasini Haider first. Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, I would definitely say, and I'm hazarding a guess over here, although we do understand that it would not, there would have been an escalation of some sort had Pakistan detected an Indian missile coming into its airspace and landing there without the necessary follow-up call from India. So I would say that yes, at the DGMO level or higher up, a call was made explaining what had happened, which is the only reason one can explain that it took 24 hours for the Pakistani establishment to even issue a statement. My sense is that the Pakistani Foreign Ministry and the NSA statements are kind of afterthoughts because they don't match, as Tara had quite rightly pointed out, with that first statement that was made. But it is also necessary for us to know, Nidhi, not just what happened in terms of the actual malfunction, but what happened subsequently. How are India's systems in terms of dealing with the fallout of this kind of an attack? How quick are those? Was there an attempt to inform up that national security chain, and how far up were people informed? Was the Prime Minister informed, for example? And I think the real reason a lot of these questions are being asked is because, as I said, there is just this one statement to go on, which makes it seem as if it's a very routine sort of technical malfunction. In fact, it is a malfunction that landed an Indian missile 124 kilometers into what can politely be called enemy territory. And the idea that Pakistan would not hit back, or that all of this would come together just by chance, I find it a little hard to believe. And Nidhi, I also want to make the point that not only must we look at our own systems, and of course, Pakistan will look at their own systems, why they weren't able to detect or track down this missile immediately. But I think we need to have a closer conversation with India's neighbors to re-establish the credibility of this kind of testing or demonstration, whatever was going on. Also remember, BrahMos is part of India's big push for military exports, for the Atmanirbhar program, and the idea that India and Russia have jointly collaborated on this project, sold to the Philippines, hoping to sell to others. Those conversations must be had. And finally,
Right.
as I said, the conversations with international agencies at some point will be had as well.
Dr. Tarakartha, would you agree that India needs to perhaps be more transparent about what happened, and that you hope the Defence Minister certainly would give us many more details when he speaks in Parliament tomorrow? You actually wrote also that both countries should recognize that there is an opportunity in near disasters. If you could explain that for us.
I mean, the one good thing is that even if you're terribly, you're in really bad sort of relations with each other, certain basic things go on. For example, in January, we just had the exchange of nuclear installations between the two sides. So this kind of CBMs, which are routine, goes on quietly without much publicity. That's one. Number two is that we already have a missile notification regime with Pakistan, but that deals only with ballistic missiles. And an interesting thing is that we started talking about it in 1999, and it was finally actually signed in 2015, which means it's really difficult to get these things across. But I think that does not include cruise missiles and I think air launch missiles. And I think we need to include those. So that could be the next step where we could stabilize the situation to say that if we should have this kind of an agreement as well, so that God forbid anything happens, there is already that confidence that, look, this is probably a mistake because we have this agreement in place. But Nidhi, these inquiries worldwide are not that open. I mean, you will get something from the Defence Minister, certainly, but the finer details are rarely, if ever, known. So that's something you might as well have to live with.
Absolutely, but I guess I think this point Suhasini was making, that the statement makes it seem like it was just another technical malfunction, like my laptop's gone off right now, which is a technical malfunction. It's not the same thing as a missile going off. Munize Jahangir, just the last word to you. How surprised are you all in the Pakistani media that this didn't escalate? And relieved, I would say. All of us certainly are very relieved here. I think you're on mute, Munize.
Well, we are very relieved that it did not escalate, but I can tell you for now that the last thing that the Prime Minister would want is to open another front. He is already facing a no confidence motion in the center, and it's going to be very difficult for him to then take up another, open up another front. Having said that, it's important to point out that Pakistan has actually officially rejected the Internal Court of Inquiry and said that it is not sufficient, and has actually called for a joint probe to establish the facts into what really happened, and has also asked the international community to take note and also asked very hard questions, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whether this is caused by a rogue element or not. So I think the questions have been sent to India, and we are still waiting for the answers.
General Dua, I don't think there's any possibility of a joint probe, is there?
No, I don't think there is I don't think there is even a requirement of a joint probe. No, because I disagree slightly with both Tara and Swasti when they said that I don't suppose we'll get to know more details. Look, it's a military matter. It happened. And both sides admit that it happened without any loss, for which we are fortunate. However, such details are matter of security protocols, and details will not be made public. As a retired man, I will not get to know what is happening either. So my point is that we need to strengthen, rather than get into the technical matters, aspects of the probe and what happened and what could have happened, we need to strengthen our dialogue process. I have always been a strong votary of the fact that apart from these back channels or track twos, we need to have more lines of communication, like we have actually with China. We have CBMs. We've had 14 levels of talk after this Ladakh incident 2 years ago. So we need to have, in a tripwire defense like LOC, we should have more channels, official channels, between channels of communication, mill to mill, so that we can avert these things rather than think of a joint probe.
All right. I have to leave it there. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us on this important story. All eyes tomorrow on Rajnath Singh's statement in India's parliament and what he has to say about this incident. I think Suhasini's point is very well taken, that we don't want to know security secrets, but I think as the people do have a right to know about what systems are in place to ensure that any disaster is averted in the future as well. What is the chain that is followed? Thank you very much to all of you. And moving on to the real war that's taking place, which is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia today denied asking China for military and economic aid for its war there, refuting an American media report. Beijing, though, refused to directly address the reports, instead accusing the US of maliciously spreading disinformation over China's role in the war. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts to end the war are stepping up, with Russian and Ukrainian negotiators set to talk again after both sides cited progress over the weekend. Interestingly, the UN Secretary General has said that he is in touch with several countries, including India, to find a way to end this war.
This was the situation before the invasion actually began. Kiev, Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, of course, that is in the Donbass region, which was where this was all triggered from. Areas further to the south. So let's take a look at what happened when the Russian invasion began on the 23rd, 24th of last month. These were the initial routes that the Russians had actually taken. These were all the areas that they were looking into. Remember, the Russian strategy was always get in and get to the cities as fast as possible. Now, as we approach day 20, they've not been able to do that. Let's move to the next page, which gives you an idea of where the Russians were on the 4th of March. Now, again, they've extended their forward lines. They have captured a great deal more territory. But in terms of the big cities, again, Kiev, Kharkiv, even cities further south on the 4th of March, for example, Mariupol or Odessa, they didn't capture the cities then either. And let's move to the next page. The next page shows the situation on the 7th of March. The areas which we've circled, and let's have that up full frame, are areas where there have been small changes which have actually taken place. Small changes between what was there from the 4th of March to the 7th of March on the actual ground position line. Let's go to the next image, and this actually shows you the scene on the 12th of March. Again, we've circled the areas where there have been further advances by the Russians. This is in fact the last page we have, and I can tell you that we've got a couple of updates on the 13th of March, but the changes on the ground in the key Kiev region have not been very significant at all. They've been actually quite small, but in other areas, for example, in western parts of Ukraine, there have been strikes, but that doesn't control the actual position on the ground. So, in as much as there is devastation in the cities because of fairly indiscriminate Russian shelling, particularly in the south of the country, parts of the north of the country, villages north of Kiev, they've not actually been able to expand their footprint a very great deal.